Hey now, Brawlers, it's time for another Board Game Brawl review with Nick Minahan, sponsored by BoardGameBliss.com.
Hey people, today we're going to take a look at Legendary Encounters Firefly from Upper Deck. This is the latest installment of their Encounters series, Legendary Encounters series, which is, the original was, Legendary was Marvel Legendary, and there's also now a Legendary Big Trouble in Little China, which is from the base system, but the Encounters games, of which there are two other ones, Alien and Predator, they are fully cooperative and they are more thematic. You're actually going through, and of course, as you can tell, they're all based off of existing IPs. In the Alien and Predators games, you're going through all the movies of those franchises. In this game, you're going through all the episodes of the very limited Firefly series. And, again, fully cooperatively, a lot more thematic elements than the original Legendary game. And at this point, I will tell you that I am actually not a fan of Firefly. I have actually said this before through other videos and live Q&As and things like that, and got a little bit of blowback. Most people don't care. But it'd be like, how could you not be a fan of Firefly? Turn in your geek card right now. It just does not work for me. Part of it might have to do with that I had like 2 or 3 separate girlfriends each try to get me to watch the show. and it never took. So maybe I'm fatigued by attempting to watch it. But nevertheless, it just never worked for me, whereas a lot of other sci-fi shows have. To me, the ultimate science fiction cowboy show is Cowboy Bebop. I'm sorry, it's just the way that it is. Old West in space. Regardless of all that, though, I love Legendary, and I really love Legendary Encounters. So, I was still eager to try this one, while at the same time having some misgivings, because theme is important in these games. So, did it all work out? Are the mechanical differences of the game enough to save it for me? So let's go ahead and take a look at the game, just a brief overview of the new stuff. I'm not going to go over how to play the entire game. Then we're going to come back, I'll let you know what I think.
Legendary Encounters Firefly is another fully cooperative game in the Legendary Encounters series for 1 to 5 players. The core rules are exactly the same as the other entries, but there's some significant additions and changes which we'll go over. Theoretically, it is compatible with the other Encounters games. No special rules are given for that, however. But, for example, avatars in this game have defense ratings explicitly due to that mechanism being present in Aliens and Predator, so who knows. First, notice that the mat is a bit bigger to accommodate the new ship rules, which we will of course go over soon. Players start off with the typical combat and recruitment basic gray cards, but they also start with a new talent card, and during the game may be forced to take flaw cards. What are those, you ask? Well, that has to do with the new avatars. These function mostly the same as the avatars from the other Encounters games, but for a few differences. They are now ranked, which determine the starting player and the effects of certain cards, and they each have a beneficial talent ability and a negative flaw ability. Talents, when you play the actual card, all let you draw a card, then you may optionally activate the avatar's ability. Activate is a great new ability that lets you play a card, but then use its effect at a time of your choosing instead of right away. In the case of talents, you must put the talent back on the stack if you choose to activate it. If not, it just goes into your discard pile. If you draw 1 or more flaws from your deck after having gained them, you must play all of them right away, and they always suck, but mercifully they go back to the stack afterward. Another important avatar note here, 5 avatars must be used in every game, but avatars that aren't controlled by players, because you'll never control more than one unless you want to, just sit near the board and will be referenced for certain card effects, and whichever 4 avatars aren't used determine which 4 hero decks are used for the crew deck. I love this, by the way. On to the heroes. Kaylee has several activate abilities apt at repairing the ship. Her ultimate can net the crew a free ship upgrade if you're willing to permanently kill her card. Mal is all about helping the rest of the crew, and his ultimate just auto-kills an enemy. Jane is a bit of a combat monster, and his ultimate gives you combat equal to the combat rating of every card in the lineup. Book is mostly peaceful, though his ultimate card has an activate ability that lets you defeat enemies at half cost. Wash is good at manipulating cards in the verse in combat zone and preventing strikes. River is some sort of psychic warrior, I guess, and her cards show it. Her ultimate nabs you every intel card in the lineup. Most of Zoe's cards are unremarkable, but her ultimate is crazy, allowing you to defeat unscanned cards. Inara is most notable because 2 of her cards allow you to heal strikes from players, which is still not an easy thing to do in any encounters game. Finally, Simon, besides having the shittiest hero art, also has a weak heal card, and his ultimate doubles your recruitment points. You can always recruit a brown coat, which, as in other encounters games, gives you 2 recruit and the coordinate ability, and each has a different class, but notably here, there are only 5 of them total to recruit. That's just odd. Legendary Firefly has the players going through scenarios and completing objectives just like the other games, and you will still stack 3 mini decks. But in this case, you're going through all 14 episodes of the show, with episode 1 being split into 2 decks. I won't spoil every deck, but just to show you, the typical objective cards, goals, enemies, and events are all here. Notably, however, you now get special rewards for completing objectives, in the form of talent cards and credits, the use of which I'll explain soon. You can even play the game in a special campaign mode that carries over certain things from game to game. Here's what else is very different in the episode decks. First, every episode deck will get a few random side job cards shuffled in. These allow the players to take extra actions in order to get special bonuses, which can come in the form of talents and credits. They're amusing and thematic diversions, but they can turn serious because if you don't complete them by the time they get to the combat zone, you will be forced to take the failure result, which is always bad. Another difference is the inclusion of inevitable enemy ships. There are 3 of them, they have different colored backs, and one is placed randomly at the bottom of each episode mini deck. When it comes out face down, it can't be scanned, and no other cards are drawn from the episode deck, but it keeps pushing cards to the left every turn. It only goes away when either all the objectives are met, or the ship gets to the combat zone, is revealed, and then has a chance to strike everybody. Now on to the ship itself, the Serenity. Between episode decks, you have an intermission and can spend the credits you've earned. These credits can be used to heal the players, or draw extra cards, or to repair the ship, which we'll get to in a second, but more importantly, you can upgrade the ship. There are 4 upgrade slots on the playmat. Each one gives some sort of bonus, either extra health, extra combat, or even extra ship spots or character lineup spots. Unfortunately, this also means that the ship can take strikes. Each strike covers up an upgrade slot, and if you take a 5th strike, the ship blows up and everyone loses. Strikes also have their own deleterious effects. Players can spend recruitment to repair these strikes, and in between missions, you can spend credits to repair them depending on which slot they're in. I saved the worst for last. As in other encounters games, players can take strikes. There's nothing different here mechanically. If everyone dies, you all lose. Except that these strikes have not only the worst art in the game, but arguably the worst art in all of Legendary and possibly in any game I've seen this year. Looking at these cards made me long for the original Ascension artwork or the entire catalog of Sentinels of the Multiverse artwork. Sorry. I will reiterate here, I don't like Firefly, and that was a big concern for me going into this, but I gotta tell you, I really, really enjoyed my time with this version of Legendary Encounters. It's possible, I'll just go ahead and say it, because I'm pretty confident. This is my favorite Legendary Encounters set. I still think I like Marvel Legendary the best out of any Legendary franchise product, but of the Encounters games, which are significantly different, this is the best one, despite the fact that I'm not into Firefly. In fact, now I really want to push Upper Deck to make a Babylon 5 set, or a Star Trek set, which are franchises that have a starship that I really like. In the case of Babylon 5, it'd be a giant space station. Anyways, this one just really, really worked for me. From the differences in the game, which are not like amazingly different, but are different enough that they're notable and make a big difference in my opinion, and also the tone of the game. Whereas, so that even if I don't like the story of Firefly, I like the lighter tone of this game, the sort of, it feels more like an adventure. It just works so much better for me thematically than it does for the other Encounters games. And we're going to break down things that I like more. But let's go to the bad stuff, because let's just get it right out of the way, because there are bad things, okay? First is the typical things that I don't like about the other Legendary games. Horrendous setup time, at least out of the box. Well, both. So out of the box,
you have to spend a half hour separating all the cards. Which I've always said, I've never been in this situation, but I always imagine what it's like for someone who just walks into their local game store and say, oh, legendary encounters, Predator, Alien, or Firefly. That sounds like it's a lot of fun. Let's bust it out and play it right here on the table. Half hour to 40 minutes later, we finally have it all separated. Okay, so that's still a problem. Also still a problem, and also, by the way, the setup just to play the game, no matter whether it's the first time or not, is still arduous, and even more so than the original Legendary, which itself was a problem. Also, particular to this Legendary Encounters game, the artwork is incredibly uneven, and the worst artwork in this game is among the worst artwork I have ever seen in a board game. It is awful, and I talked about that in my overview and showed you the worst of it. I don't know what went wrong here. First and foremost, they shouldn't have different artists to begin with. I know that it's a lot of artwork to throw on one artist's plate, and I totally appreciate how much work and effort artists and graphic designers spend on games or any of their projects. But still, take the extra time and keep everything consistent, please. But then if you're not going to keep it consistent, at least have the quality be consistent. Because I'm sorry, I know art is the most subjective thing ever outside of music, but god damn, some of this artwork was terrible. And even not being a Firefly fan, well, I'll tell you for sure, there were people that I played this game with, several people who were Firefly fans, and they were like, in fact, a couple of people who don't like Legendary but wanted to play this game just because it was Firefly, who were like, oh god, the artwork is just killing me. Because it's also possible that they didn't have the license to use some likenesses of some of the actors. Because I know, at least in the case of one of the characters, Wash, and I wouldn't know this personally, someone said, it looks nothing like the actor, which is another bad thing. So art and graphic design are really kind of a bummer for this. But now on to the good stuff. There's a lot of things I like that are different than the other Encounters games. The ship being the most obvious thing, and this is why I think this will work for a lot of science fiction games. I just love the idea of upgrading the ship. Universal effects, all very useful to varying degrees. Not easy to get. They're just the right difficulty to get. They're not omnipresent, but if you get them, they make a difference. They feel significant, and I like that. In fact, the whole system of getting credits as rewards is great. And I haven't played this game in campaign mode because, honestly, I didn't have... I played with different groups. It just didn't feel like something I could really pull off. But also, it's still incredibly difficult, which also can go back into the pile of bad things about the game. So I don't even know how you pull off a campaign mode with any kind of consistency. I feel like it's like Kingdom Death. You just keep starting over and over again. But and it's not really meant for that. But in any case, the idea that you could keep making your ship better and better and filtering through the upgrades from adventure to adventure and getting these credits is a really great thing. And credits can be used for other stuff. But specifically about the ship, obviously you can be struck as well. You can get ship strikes, but then you can repair them. So it's not a huge deal, but it does make the game feel more thematic. And there's more of a stake in the game because now it's not just if all of you die, you lose, which is still a thing. Now the ship might blow up, which is another thing to worry about, but I'm willing to deal with that because it's such a fun mechanism to the game. Let's talk about the avatars, because the avatars are mostly just like the ones from the other Encounters games, which, by the way, is a mechanism I always wanted to be introduced to the original Legendary game. I know it's not as good of a thematic fit, perhaps, but it's just a great thing to have. And to have like a character that gives you focus, it gives you an original card. Well, that's how it worked in the other Encounters games, but now you have the talent cards and the flaw cards. And I'm not going to say that I want this to be in every game, the talents and the flaws, because I usually err on the side of having less things to worry about, less fiddly cards to have to shuffle in and out, more decks to put on the table. But it works here, and it's very interesting how it works, with talents being given out as a reward and flaws being penalties for failure in some cases, or just given out as like sort of part and parcel with damage and such. Just very interesting how that works, and you being forced to play your flaws, but they go away, but you have to count on that. When you see one player get loaded down with flaws, you're like, oh my god, that's going to be terrible for us when it comes up. So you try to anticipate that and hope that it's not that bad. But then strategically using your talents, which leads to one of the great mechanisms in this game, which is Activate, which feels like something that should have been in Legendary the whole time. Because timing in Legendary of playing your cards and getting its effects is so incredibly crucial. And so having something that flouts that rule, and now I can play this card and get 3 combat, but then not use its really cool ability until it's at a time convenient for me. Because maybe it is more important that I kill this villain first with the combat from this card, but then use that card's ability at a later point. Just as an example, I love that, and that's what the talents allow you to do specifically, and other cards from the heroes will as well. So that's a great thing, and I would hope that would carry over. I like the ranking of the cards as well, because that will actually influence some effects. But most importantly, and perhaps I bet a lot of people overlook this and don't think much of it, and maybe they shouldn't. Maybe I'm making too big a deal out of it. But the idea that you always play with the 5 avatars, right? And that's important because the avatars that you don't actually play with, in other words, aren't actually assigned to a player, still are in play, even if you have less than 5 players, because that matters for card effects. That in and of itself is interesting because there's, I know there's a friend of mine who really dislikes it when I have several friends actually who really dislike it when cooperative games force you to play as multiple heroes. Players to play as multiple heroes. And this kind of gets around it by saying, well, you only play as one thing, but these heroes are still in play because they're going to matter. But on top of that, the heroes that you choose to play as will determine which heroes go into the crew deck. The ones you don't play as, those are the cards used in the crew deck. I love that. I don't know why, but I love that because it just makes sense and it leads to more decision making. Well, I'd love to play as Zoe, but if I play as Zoe, she ain't going to be in the deck. And so we won't ever get her really cool cards. But that's a great idea. I want to see more of that as well. It's another thing I want to go into the main legendary bloodstream. Okay, so I hope that we do. So there's a lot of great changes like that. I love the small odd jobs or side jobs that go into the mission decks, the mission decks, episode decks. Great little thing, very thematic thing. Even having not watched all of the show and not enjoying most of the show that I have watched, I love the thematic element to it. They're fun. Sometimes they're really kooky, like the one where you have to deliver a baby. It's like you have to say breathe, which is irrelevant. And usually I don't like that stuff in games. But the card mechanism itself is great, so you want to do that fun stuff along with it. It's just a fun little thing to add. Along with that, in the episode decks, a new thing is the inevitable enemies, which I thought was like, is that really going to be great? But it is great, because one of the annoying things that maybe wasn't a huge deal from the original Encounters games was that it was always weird that you can just keep drawing through the mission decks even though you haven't completed one mission. They just kind of blurred into one another. No, now the episode finishes. There's a climax, which is a big badass enemy coming out if you haven't met your goals yet. And that really forces you we got to rush and meet our goals or else we're all going to take a strike because it's inevitable. And I just love that. It's a great finality to each episode, and I love the fact that you have all these episodes that you can go through. I'm really gushing over this game because I really feel like with every iteration of both the original Legendary and Legendary Encounters, they're getting closer to a really fantastic version of it. And I think for Encounters, this is the closest they've come yet. Again, I wish the art was better. I wish it was based off of a license that I personally enjoyed more, but of course, there are tons of people who do love Firefly. And not every Firefly board game and card game that's come out to this point has been that well received by everyone. But I really would personally give my seal of approval, oh God, I hate using that phrase, sorry, to this one for people who do love Firefly and the people who love Legendary and Legendary Encounters in general. Really enjoy this one. Thumbs up for me.
Thanks for watching. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon. And make sure to check out our sponsor, Board Game Bliss, where you can find an amazing selection of games from around the world. BoardGameBliss.com. Thanks for your support.